get this
I'm on the
conversation started. Good people, good conversations, good topics, and the world would be a better place.
So we're on
All
my
right, we are
channel, and we should also be on Tom's channel.
so. All right, it looks like we're live. So I am here with Analytical Chick. Sorry, guys, we had some technological difficulties, but without further ado, we are here and we're ready to have a good conversation on, of all things, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the way that people are manipulated through the use of language. So I guess I want to start by asking you how you got into this.
How I got into YouTubing?
Yeah, talking about politics and the world on the World Wide Web.
I guess because I was watching channels, and I watched channels more and more, and then eventually I just wanted to start my own channel. Natural outgrowth from being a huge viewer.
Yeah, I know for me myself, I had really started going through a political awakening. I had come across information with how they poison the food, information about vaccinations, information about false flags being used to start wars, and it really pissed me off. And when I got started, I made a documentary about the still unsolved murder of DNC staffer Seth Rich, and my first video got 10,000 views, and I wound up making 8 documentaries on what is still the unsolved murder of Seth Rich. So it's funny to see how people get involved. And then, of course, you started commenting on my videos a few days ago. You said you want a live stream, and I said, sure, I'd be happy to. I think the more good conversations we have with good people, the better.
Yeah. So I think I figured out how I found you. I think that I figured out I found you. It looks like it was when your channel blew up, but you did a video on Tommy Robinson, and I think that's when I found you. So like I subbed you, and like I was I had been subbing a lot of new people or something, and I didn't really like watch a lot of your back videos at the time. And then when you did that video the other day, I was like, it came up in my subscribers tab, and I was like, oh, who is this? And I watched that, and I was like, yeah, he makes good points. And then like I watched a couple of your other videos, or like portions of them, and then I was like, yeah, let me reach out to him and see if he wants to do a chat. I'm always looking for people. I want to eventually like have a handful of people and like do a show or something, like a regular once a week show or something.
Yeah, well, you had asked me to stream after I had made a video talking about rhetoric and how the people on the right side of the political aisle, in my opinion, don't fight the right way. And what I was pointing out is that the left is very effective at using rhetoric. And the truth is, in our society, most people can't distinguish the difference between what is logic and what is rhetoric. And that's why when you go out into society, you see people who, as Scott Adams would say, it seems like they're almost watching 2 different movies. And if we could better understand the way people who lean right think, better understand the way that people who lean left think, we could help bridge that gap and maybe start to make some ground in the culture war.
Right.
And it is a culture war. And I think people like you and people like me and so many brave people like Tommy Robinson you brought up. I know a lot of people on this channel have mixed views about Tommy, but I like him. Do recognize that it is a culture war, and that only gets heightened as you have a family and you have children. And I think it's something really important. I think it's great that you're doing it. So you wanted to talk to me about how vocabulary was used, or how vocabulary has changed over time. So would you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I did a video called The War on Vocabulary. And so my video was about like how they got themselves to be called liberals when they're not liberals, or how they've basically forced everyone to say undocumented instead of illegal aliens, which is the proper term. Like, all of that stuff.
And I don't think people realize that language is constantly being changed around us. And anytime you come across a person who routinely tries to redefine words, Jordan Peterson routinely tries to redefine words, you have to look out that they might be trying to manipulate you. And when I talk about grammar, logic, and rhetoric, a lot of people don't know what that means. And the first part of that is the part we would have to define when it comes to understanding vocabulary. Because in a classical education, and you could read about this in Dorothy Sayers' The Lost Tools of Learning, 35-page book, very easy to follow along. In classical education, and they teach this in the Ivy League, they teach this if you're on a debate team, the most important thing you could do at the onset of reading any documentation, at the onset of any debate, is properly define your terms. Because if a term is able to be, if the definition of a term can be changed over time or over the course of an argument, then it becomes very difficult to follow along with what that argument is. And a sophisticated speaker, a sophisticated master of persuasion can easily manipulate an untrained mind that doesn't know the importance of first defining vocabulary.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I was in the debate club very briefly in high school, and I mean, I wasn't like huge in it. Like, there were people who were in it like every single year, went to every single meeting. I was in it like 1 year, and I didn't go to all the meetings, and or maybe I think a lot of the meetings were like for the officers only. But I went to some meetings, and we did cover some of the stuff. You know, I mean, and if you look at like Crowder, I assume you know who Steven Crowder is because he's pretty well known.
Yeah, I'm going to join the Mug Club.
Ah, cool. So Crowder, when he sits down with people, when he does those, you know, blah 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 blah, change my mind. When he does those and he sits down with people, he always says, well, let's stop and see, you know, let's see, you know, let's go through the terms, the basic terms that are going to come up in this argument. And he tries to define the terms at the beginning of the discussion with the people. Like, he'll have them in a binder or whatever and stuff.
Yeah, Crowder carries around old dictionaries with him. And most people don't understand the significance of that. In fact, if you really want to understand how society has been manipulated, get an old dictionary and just look up how the words have changed. Before you brought up the word liberal, well, the word liberal used to mean
conservative,
free market capitalism. The word, right, more aligns with what a conservative is today, right?
Right, they used to call conservatives liberal conservatives.
And now the definition of liberal has completely changed, where people that think they're liberals, which I would argue they're honestly fascistic in their way of thinking.
Commies.
Yeah, or commies, right? Well, even those words, people don't understand the epistemology of fascism. That fascism itself was an offshoot of communism. That Giovanni Gentili, the father of fascism, the Karl Marx of fascism, if you will, he himself was a communist who just had a slight disagreement with how they wanted to model things. And so many governments we see in the world today, I would argue, actually operate in a fascistic sense. And most people in the world aren't aware of that because so much of the narrative is controlled by the media, who themselves are controlled by, guess who? The same people that control the government.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's self-explanatory, in that the very nature of what fascism is partnerships between corporations and government. And when you talk about people who are on the liberal side of the political spectrum, a lot of what you'll get from them is or at least it was, they flip-flop based on what the media tells them, is we need the government to protect us from the corporations, but I don't think that they understand that the corporations own the government, and the government also has leverage over the corporations, and they're not protecting you, they're working hand in hand to squash you.
Yes. And another thing is, like, communism is basically global socialism, and like Nazism and fascism are basically like a national socialism. They're all forms of socialism. Or I've also heard that socialism is a bridge to communism. But if you look at like the USSR, it was like the United Soviet Socialist States of Russia, or I'm not sure which S was which, but the S's were Soviet and socialist, whether it was Soviet socialist or socialist Soviet, but, some of my chatters pointed out more people are watching on your channel. Yeah, I actually have your channel on my phone. So we have 4 people watching on my channel, 6 people watching on your channel. I've never done this before, by the way, for those of you who are viewing on both channels. I've never done this, like, where we both broadcast the same chat slightly differently, but, like you're broadcasting your camera and our Google Hangouts, and I'm just broadcasting the Google Hangouts.
Well, great job. I think you have a lot to add to the conversation, so, keep it up, and the more people you talk to, the more exposure you get, the better it is. And just focusing on the general topic of what we want to discuss, even if you, in every route in which we can take this conversation, whether it's the definition of liberalism, the definition of fascism, the definition of communism, all of these things are changed over time. Even if you look at what's been happening in the United States of America right now, during a speech a few weeks ago or a month ago, Donald Trump used the word nationalism. Now, of course, the media, which is controlled by globalist corporations, want to make that a dirty word. So what they did was, the way they manipulate people is to bend the definition of nationalism. So what they say is, see, Donald Trump said he likes nationalism, and what that means is a United States of America with only white people. What they did was they bent the definition of nationalism and made it white nationalism. But they're completely different concepts, completely different words.
I actually did a debate. I don't know if you probably have I don't know how much of my stuff you've looked through. Like, I've looked through a little bit of your stuff, but I haven't really looked through your channel that thoroughly either. But I actually did a debate with a white nationalist. And the debate was civic nationalism versus ethno-nationalism, and I took the side of civic nationalism. So,
now, when you say civic nationalism, how would you define that?
Basically having a nationalism around ideas. In this case, the Constitution and freedom and all of that. And my main argument against her was that she's claiming that, civic nationalism has failed. And I said, well, what you're calling civic nationalism isn't civic nationalism, it's multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is not the same thing as civic nationalism, because in order to have civic nationalism, you need a country at least unified around an idea. Like, think the 80s. The 80s, you still had, no matter what race and immigrants, the country was still united around, like, the American idea, and that broke down, I think, especially in the 2000s.
Yeah, well, they did a very effective job with the 1965 Immigration Act of flooding the United States of America with immigrants from the third world. Now, you say, why is that a problem? Why is it a problem that they're bringing brown people over here? It's not a problem that they're bringing brown people over here. What's a problem is that if you look at things through aggregate statistics, that people from third world countries tend to prefer socialistic type governments, which their very nature involve the erosion of basic liberties. So when you talk about a type of cultural nationalism, which the United States was built on, that's what we're giving up through allowing unchecked immigration from the third world.
Well, now, and it's also the fact that the immigration is unchecked. And you have, like, they're being drawn by a welfare state. You have people like Soros dropping pamphlets and putting on TV commercials saying, go to the U.S. and be rich. You'll be able to get on the U.S.'s welfare. You know, I mean, there isn't, you know, if we didn't have welfare and welfare that was being able, that someone can get very easily, that someone can get, you know, while being an illegal, or at least in some places they can get it as an illegal, and in other places they can get it as a legal resident without being a citizen. I would say that it should only be for natural born citizens or naturalized citizens after 5 years. That's what I was always told growing up that was the case. And I don't know when it changed, if it ever changed, I was probably lied to the whole time. So that's what our teachers always said.
And that's how the nature of immigration has changed. For instance, when my grandparents came to the United States of America, which took place between the years of 1900 and 1920, they arrived in America, and there was no such thing as a welfare state. They got here, and they either found a way to work, found a way to make money, or they would quite literally starve to death. They weren't a burden on anyone else. And the type of immigrants that came to America from, 1776 until the 1965 Immigration Act or really maybe until the New Deal, were people who longed to be free, as it says on the Statue of Liberty, not the way they distort that message now, if you want to talk about definitions. They were people who wanted to come to the United States of America because they valued economic freedom. They valued the idea that they could start their own business, they can get some wood, and they could carve it into a chair, and they could sell it, and they can make a better life for themselves, a free life, a life that involved liberty, a life that involved free speech and a right to protect yourself against totalitarianism, the right to bear arms, the right to fair trials, the right to privacy. And after the 1965 Immigration Act, or like I said, possibly after the New Deal, the type of immigrant that started coming to the United States changed. People that are motivated by coming to the United States not for freedom, but for welfare. And the danger of that is not only that they're getting the welfare, that they will vote for whatever politicians want to leave the border open as long as their family can come to the United States and also get the welfare. And the cost of that is the very liberty, freedom, and rugged individualism that made America, in my opinion, until probably Woodrow Wilson, the greatest country in the history of the world.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at, as such a young country, we rose to the top, and now they're trying to say, oh, it's only because of World War II. We had risen to the top before World War II. They try to say, the left has this narrative that we rose to the top because we didn't get involved in World War II until the very end, and therefore, Europe was in ashes, and, we were pretty much still intact. I'm sure that didn't hurt, but we were already risen to the top before this. I mean, if you look into history, you know that. But, I mean, they've been obfuscating real history for the last, I don't know how long. That's one thing, is I'm actually Gen X. I don't know if you knew that. So I'm pretty sure I'm older than you. Because you look like you're probably either a millennial or, no, you're not Gen Z, because Gen Z are high school. But you look like you're probably a millennial. You look like you're pretty young, 20s, maybe early 30s.
Yes, I am a rare millennial, a diamond in the rough, as they say.
I mean, the funny thing though is the, pro-Trump, pro-right-wing YouTubers, it's full of millennials. Like, there's a handful of us Gen Xers on there, and there's some Gen Zers, but I would say the right-wing millennials have pretty much clustered onto YouTube more than any place else.
I think a big
Twitter.
part of the reason for that is the globalist media wants you to be left-wing. The Marxist-controlled education system wants you to be left-wing. And because of that, from a very early age, they indoctrinate young children into outsourcing their thinking to authority. And when children graduate from school, the mainstream media, the New York Times, CNN, Fox News, whatever it might be, all of these stations serve as a type of mainstream authority. Now, Fox News being the exception, that it's controlled opposition on the right, almost everything you get in the mainstream is relentlessly pushing leftism. So people that have
succumbed Fox News drops a lot of leftism. Like if you don't stick with like Tucker and what's his name? I want to say Bill O'Reilly, but that's the one that got fired, right? Yeah, Hannity, that's who I'm thinking of. If you don't stick with like Tucker Carlson, Hannity, and Waters, like those three are fine, and Tommy Lahren is okay, but I don't know if she even has her own show. But other than those three, like it's a mixed bag. And you can get like some of these women that are on this Fox and Friends in the morning. There's one or at least one blonde woman that's made some like really like leftist kind of comments, and I turn it off.
Fox News is complete controlled opposition. They will see the larger part of the agenda for the globalists. Right. What they want to do is create a global government. What they want to do is implement a type of Fabian socialism. And a big part of that agenda is using the United States military as the muscle to create the situation needed to create a global government, whether that's the destabilization of Syria, the American military attempted to overthrow Assad in Libya, in Syria, the destabilization of Libya and the American government trying to overthrow Assad in Syria. Good thing Trump is pulling us out. So what they do is they set up controlled opposition, and they take the patriotic Americans that have a natural love for the country, and they use that controlled opposition to get these people to support America's endless foreign wars. Now, they've run into a problem because Trump ran on a neo-type of, in a way, isolationist policy, and we're starting to see that enacted a little bit, and that has swung a lot of these pro-war minds away from that type of thinking.
Right. And I mean, we're still seeing some of the more, like, they might be Trump supporters, but I saw a tweet out from somebody who is a Trump supporter, but she's like probably always been conservative. She's from the like Charlie Kirk, Prager Force. It's a young girl. She's like 20 or something in college. But she's like more of your classic Republican who also supported Trump. And she made a snarky comment about Trump pulling out of... Trump can pull out of Syria, but he can't pull out of his wives. What?
All right.
I mean, but it was very obvious, like, if she was like,
I like the guy, but he's definitely not the best husband. That's for sure.
I think the idea was because he has 5 kids.
Right,
I think
right.
that's a lot, but I don't.
You know, but before you were saying that a lot of YouTubers are on the right wing or have right-minded politics and are millennials, and a big reason for that is because people on the left wing, because authority generally promotes leftist ideology, people that have succumbed to the indoctrination are generally on the left, which means you don't get many. There are people out there like Tim Pool, but you don't get many free-thinking people who are on the left side of the political spectrum. So
Yeah.
it's very natural that as we have
I
a
think it was more an
on the
age
internet.
comment. It was more. I think it was more an age comment because if you look at the older millennials and people my age, they're usually on Facebook, which I don't know how they blow up on Facebook. Like some of these people that blew up on Facebook, I have a Facebook page. I've put my videos on Facebook. They don't get shared on Facebook. I get all my people on YouTube mostly. I mean, I probably don't put the kind of attention into Facebook, but maybe like also they blew up. Maybe some of these people got popular before it was hard to get popular on Facebook, but my stuff does not get shared on Facebook.
Well, I mean, I can tell you firsthand that right after the beginning of 2017, when Facebook started changing their algorithms, for example, I had a page that for about a year had grown 50 new followers a day. I had thousands of followers on it, had grown literally 50 new followers a day or more every day for almost a whole year. They changed their algorithm and that just stopped immediately. In fact, it started going down every day to the point where I just stopped using the platform. So when they called for the combating of fake news at the end of 2016, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, the globalists get what they want. And you see that in the World Economic Forum. You see that in the Bilderberg Group. The primary topic that they discussed has been the censoring of what they call fake news and the beating back of populism, which is really nationalism or an anti-globalist agenda.
Yeah.
But when we talk about the leftist mind and the way left-wing people and the way right-wing people think, and I don't want to put it all in a box because I know many right-wing people who are absolute snowflakes. They have cognitive dissonance. If you introduce information to them that is logically inconsistent, but it goes against their worldview, they'll respond with emotion. Now, the left tends to be worse with this, but there's plenty of it on the right wing. But when we talk about we have spoken about definitions. You talk about the way left-wing people think and right-wing people think. There really is a clear distinction. And what I mean by that is people on the right or people who are right-wing minded generally view the world from a more analytical and logical perspective. And when they have arguments with leftists, they will say, well, look at this logical sequence of events, or look at this logically perfect argument I could form, and they kind of get that leftist blank stare.
Yeah, that's what, like, when I argue with leftists, like I was chatting with someone I knew recently, and they were like, "Oh, but the children of," and I'm like, "Well, what about American women?" I'm like, "Why don't we care about women who are getting, their rear ends and their fronts grabbed?" Like, I took it to the emotional because I was like, "How come we don't care about them? How come we don't care about the people who used to live in these areas that are getting taken over by gangs? How come we don't care about all the blacks that are getting pushed out of Compton?" Like, and they don't know what to say because for once they're not used to right-wing people coming back at them with basically like emotional arguments.
And what you just described as emotional argument is what I would term as being rhetoric. And that is the way the leftist mind thinks. the leftist political mind, not the people in power, but the people that follow those in power,
The voters
are rhetorical thinkers. And what that means is they think more through emotions. And just like when you use, or anyone, a right wing person uses a logical argument to a leftist and you get that blank leftist stare, well, leftists feel the same way when they make their emotional arguments and you get that right wing stare like, is this lady lost? They don't, their minds don't work in the same way. It's kind of like left brain, right brain, so to speak.
They've done studies, and actually even leftists have like come out with studies and basically said that like it's literally a different kind of person that ends up a conservative versus a Democrat. But then again, you have all these people who are right now changing sides. You have a huge influx of these walkaway people right now. And I don't think it's just because of Brandon's movement. I think his movement was more he came out with this thing knowing that those people were out there. And then he found them.
Yeah, and we are seeing that change. And I think a lot of people on the right wing think the use of rhetoric is wrong because it's, in a way, manipulative. But if you want to reach people that are naturally rhetorical thinkers, then you have to use rhetoric to reach them. And rhetoric can be manipulative, but it doesn't have to be. For example, if you use logic to back your rhetoric up, then you are invoking emotions of truth. For example, if you take the topic of abortion and you frame it in terms of rhetoric instead of terms of logic, why is it that the right wing of the political spectrum doesn't routinely have mothers telling stories, and I know plenty of people who this is true for, that regret what they did, mothers who have had abortions that regret it, that they have depression because of it, and have them tell the stories about them coming to the realization that they had sanctioned a doctor to murder their child, and have music playing in the background. Now, you could say that's manipulative, but that's actually using truth in a rhetorical sense to invoke emotions in listeners. Because people that are left-wing thinkers have been indoctrinated with the rhetoric of people on the right wing want to oppress women, right? They don't want you to have a right to choose. There is no logical comprehension, and that there is a baby, a third party involved in this decision. There's a living human being.
Right.
To them, they have been convinced because of rhetoric, no, don't worry about that. That's just a clump of cells. And for anyone who is a parent that have experienced the true miracle that is the creation of a life and having the ultrasound on a belly, you understand the true emotions that can be invoked through that type of rhetoric. Yet the right wing is so logical, and also because controlled opposition like fake news and people like Ben Shapiro, that they don't effectively use rhetoric to win over people who think in a certain way.
Yeah. Well, one of the other things that I've pointed out, and this is one of those logic versus rhetoric type things, the left will tell you that if you think any women should have the right to abortion whatsoever, then you're pro-choice. You need to call yourself pro-choice. But if you really think about it, you could almost argue anybody who wants the scales to be tipped in the opposite direction should really be considered pro-life. So, like, if you are against late term, but you're okay with, like, very, very early term, well, their fight is to make late term even more all over. Like, some states don't allow late term and some states do. They want to make it in every single state. They want to make late term a thing. They want to make late term federally mandated. But if you don't agree with late term, I mean, really, we should be trying to convince those people that they are pro-life, because you still, or if you want to defund Planned Parenthood, if you think that our tax dollars should not pay for Planned Parenthood, as long as you believe in either thing, you want things that don't exist that are in the pro-life direction. So functionally, you are actually pro-life, but they convince people that they're pro-choice when they might not be, because 80% of the country believes against late term. And a lot of people, they think they're pro-choice, but if you ask them about late term, like automatically, most people, I've had this conversation with many people where they're like, well, they want the choice, and whether you agree with early term or not, that's a lot of people who could be on the pro-life side that you don't really have them fighting for us, simply because you've allowed the left to convince them that they're pro-choice. When, as long as they want to help move things in the pro-life direction, I would say we should be convincing them that they're pro-life. But most people who are pro-life don't really want to do that, because they are stuck on the idea of no abortions whatsoever. And I'm saying, like, there's a lot of people that we could probably get on board because they are against late term. I mean, and you look at, like, you take a picture of, like, a woman who's like 8 months, and you take a picture of what that baby looks like inside of her, and very few people are going to agree with terminations at that point.
I mean, could you imagine? Imagine this. We are in the height of the 2016 presidential election, and your average American is sitting on their couch and they're watching television. And their programming comes to a commercial break, and it goes to the commercial. And it is a voiceover of Hillary Clinton explaining how she fully supports late-term abortions, which she does. And as she's explaining her support for late-term abortions, they have the video of a doctor performing a late-term abortion. And as Hillary Clinton is talking about her support for it, he takes his prongs, because this is how they do it, and he rips the baby's leg from its body. And Hillary's still talking, and he takes his prongs and he rips the baby's arm from its body.
I think they decapitate it first, actually.
And then it goes to an all-black screen, and it just says in big, bold letters, Hillary Clinton for president. Can you imagine how effective that type of rhetoric can be? But the right doesn't use it because they're led by people that are manipulative, that are controlled opposition, and don't want people on the right, the herd, to understand how you fight back, especially against rhetorical thinkers.
I mean, I would say the right is doing a little better with Trump in president. Like, did you see those ads that the GOP created? I don't know if they put them on TV, but they put them on their YouTube channel, and a few of them, like, there was one called Unhinged. There was another one that, I think Unhinged was the second one that went semi-viral. Let me see. Let me go to their channel. GOP. Oh, it's autofilling failures. That might be a new one that I don't know about. But filter channel. I'll tell you in a second.
I mean,
Yeah, they have two channels. They have the War Room and the regular GOP.
the War Room is an Infowars offshoot with Owen Schroyer.
I didn't know that. No, I'm saying GOP War Room.
The GOP War Room. No, I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, the commercial, The Left in 2018, Unhinged. That's the one. Did you see that one?
I did not.
That's the one that. Here. It went like. It went. I'll send you a link to it, and actually, I'll put it in my chat as well for anybody who didn't see it. So, Isabella.
And the right does need to get better with it. And there's so many things that you can take that concept and apply it to. I mean, if you just take the topic of gun control, whenever there is a shooting, particularly a school shooting in the United States of America or anywhere in the world, the mainstream media, the politicians, they never let a good tragedy go to waste. They are instantly all over the airways talking about how if you're not in support of gun control, you want children to be murdered. They're appealing to the rhetorical thinkers on the left. Now, of course, we can all combat this logically, right? That criminals disobey the law, and because of that, banning guns won't stop someone who's willing to shoot and murder someone else. A proper way to stop a shooting, which we've seen many times, including at school shootings, is to have other guns in the hands of good guys. And a gun-free zone is where you get shot. Armed to the teeth zone is where your children are safe. It's why politicians send their kids to schools that are armed with guns. But the left wing does a very good job at using the emotions of children being killed, using rhetoric to control the hive mind, to control the mass mind. Now, if the right wing was effective, what they would do is run ads all the time that if you are in favor of gun control, you are in favor of leaving women to be beat by men. Why would you want women to be defenseless against men? Why don't you want women to be able to defend themselves?
Right. And I think this is this is where we have a strength that like the YouTubers are not just like smaller YouTubers, but some of the bigger YouTubers are kind of like teaching people, like, you know, through example by saying like this is what we say, and showing, you know, the better way to go about it. So, you know, we're having those people you know, sort of lead that. But you know, the really, really big voices on the right don't do that, which is Fox News. You know, you get kind of a mixed, I don't know if you know OANN. They are kind of mainstream media because they're actually like on the television, but they're not in a lot of markets. But they do give a much stronger message than you get out of Fox.
Yeah, One American News does a good job. And there are a lot of people out there doing great work in the culture war. It's why they have to work so hard to censor everyone. What's ironic, because the media, who are the masters of rhetoric, and they try to convince everyone that Donald Trump is dumb, are well aware that President Trump, like him, love him, hate him, you're definitely not indifferent about him, is a master of rhetoric. In fact, he just today, and if you check the picture I used for this stream, he had tweeted out how effective Israel's wall was. And
right.
This is in itself is very effective rhetoric, because he's pointing out that other nations, including Israel, who everyone in the media likes to pretend they're cozy with, although some of the, well, anyway, let's just
Yeah,
let's
the
just say I
left
don't think
doesn't
the
like
leftist media is
Israel.
that
I'm
cool.
Jewish. You don't have.
Oh, go on.
I'm Jewish, and I could tell you, yeah, the left doesn't. I've actually seen there's been a few articles, like for one thing, Dove Hyken was basically, he said on his Twitter, and he recently said in an interview, he said it came down to he was not going to run again on the Democrat platform. So it came down to him. I mean, he was at the time to really retire anyway because he's already, I think, in his 60s. But I think if he was younger and he was this frustrated with the Democrat Party, he probably would have just switched parties. But instead, he retired, and he's gonna continue to be like an activist without being an actual politician. I don't know if you're familiar with Dove Hyken, but he's an assemblyman, and he's an Orthodox Jew. There's like a handful of I think mine is also Orthodox. But Dove Hyken, he actively like weighs in, like he writes articles for the New York Post, and anybody that will let him write an article for their platform, he gets interviewed and writes articles for the Jewish magazines and the Jewish newspapers as well. So he's pretty well known within New York City, and he's well known. Like, he was not my assemblyman, but I knew who he was, and I didn't even know who my own one was until I looked him up. I had to look mine up, whereas I knew who Dove Hyken was. So he actually spoke at a protest that I attended, and of course they screamed that everybody at the protest was a Nazi. So they literally called this Orthodox Jewish man a Nazi. That's the left.
They don't care about the term. Again, the left is very effective with that, and what you're really seeing is how effective the rhetoric is to non-logical thinkers, because you have all these people on the left wing of the political spectrum who live in this fantasy world in which there are literal Nazis running around everywhere. And many of these people that they were accusing of being Nazis, like David Horowitz, are actually Jewish people. Milo Yiannopoulos is a Jewish gay man who is married.
Oh yeah, they call him a homophobe.
Right, married to a black man, and they will accuse him of being a Nazi, and that's the power of rhetoric, and that's what the left does, and that's how they control the leftist mind.
It also helps that they have like all of the media. I mean, if they were trying to push out this narrative and they didn't have all the mainstream medias, they'd have a rougher time. But part of it is they have all of these. I had an example. Was it yesterday? I was talking to somebody and I made this offhand comment. She said something about the UN, and I was like, yeah, absolutely, I hate the UN. I said, yeah, I am a fan of John Birch Society, and they're against the UN. She was like, aren't they white supremacists? This was another Jewish person I was talking to, and I was like, here we go again. I was like, that's the left. The left calls them that. It's a lie. The left lies about everybody and calls everybody white supremacists to try to like, it's exactly what child bullies do. Like, you call them names and then everybody else is afraid to associate with it. Like, they pick out a child that they think is weak and they call that child names so that no one will be friends with that child. And that's exactly what the left does. They pick out right-wing stuff and then they call it names, hoping that people will be afraid to it. And it works to some extent. Maybe not as, it's working less now that people are starting to see through them. But, people become afraid to associate with a lot of right-wing stuff because, I heard it's white supremacist. Like, this woman, told me, I heard that's white supremacist. And I was like, nope, it's not. That's a lie from the left. And she's looking at me like dumbfounded. I'm like, do you know the left called us racist too. I told her, I said, I remember back, see, and I didn't know at the time that it was the left because I didn't understand politics the way I do now. But when I was converting to Judaism, I remember that there was stuff coming out where they were attacking Jews and saying that Jewish people are racist because they marry their own kind. And I remember people defending themselves against this, like trying to be like, well, no, explaining it. And now I understand, like, the silliness of this, the naivety that you think you're just going to, like, explain it away when you don't understand. It's not a misunderstanding. It's an intentional attack. It's an intentional lie. Every freaking time, that's what the left does.
And the left does gain their power through bullying. They require our submission in order to gain their power. It's why you should never apologize to the left, because you have to hold them to their own standards, and the left, right out of Solinsky, the left will never apologize to you. If you look at Joy Behar, she was she was exposed as having blogs that said all types of homophobic things. If you look at Mika Brzezinski, looking to her father, but if you look at Mika Brzezinski, just 2 weeks ago, called someone a butt boy on air. Now, if a right-wing person had done this, they would have been boycotted, the advertisers would have pulled out, the entire media would have attacked them, demanded that they be fired, that they wouldn't be able to make a living in the United States of America. But if a leftist does it, they won't even consider apologizing, to the point where someone like James Gunn, the director of Guardians of the Galaxy, can openly make very off-colored, we'll say, jokes about pedophilia and be pictured hanging out at parties with convicted pedophiles, along with throwing parties in which he's dressed as a priest and all of the girls around him are dressed as young children, and the media will completely come to their defense.
Yep.
And it really is a disgusting thing. And they gain all of their power through getting people to kneel. And it's why you must never apologize, never kneel, never be afraid to speak your truth. Because I remember when I started doing this, I didn't know if I wanted to get into it. You put yourself out there, it's scary, they might come after you. You know what? If that's your mindset, then you're already a slave. You're already under totalitarianism. And if you don't push back against that totalitarianism, it's only going to get worse and worse over time. And if you think it's bad now, wait and see how bad it's going to be for your children.
Yep.
So, anyway, I've had a lot of fun with this stream. It's been about an hour, and I do want to spend some time with my wife tonight.
Another time.
Absolutely. Anytime you'd like to do this, just let me know.
Maybe next time we'll organize like 3. I think streams are good with like 3 to 5 people. So we'll find some more people to add to it, and we'll do a stream maybe with 3 or 4 people.
Well, absolutely. I thought this stream was great, and I hope everyone got some nice value out of it. So if you have nothing else to add, then I'll cut the stream and let you have the last word.
All right. I guess for people who are on my channel, thanks for stopping by my channel, and I will see you all next time.
Power to the individual, and long live liberty. Bye, guys.